In the beginning, there was a canvas, beautifully primed and stretched by Richard, primed in a tinted gesso with several coats, and surrounded by a frame made by John, my wonderful framer, from timber that I have cut to my own pattern. I love to start with a blank canvas and an almost blank mind. If I knew in advance what the painting would look like on completion, I don't think I would feel the compulsion to make that particular painting. So I start with very tentative marks, with a large brush, probably hog's hair, dipped into a muddy colour paint. I've got a vague idea. Maybe this is going to be a pet shop. But on the other hand, I think these animals may be growing a little too large to be contained within a pet shop. Let's see what happens. I'm not quite sure where it will go from here, but I want to use these early marks and see what happens, how the composition begins to build. You see that the lines are often overlapping, where I'm not quite sure where the outline is going to be, but this will gradually resolve itself later on in the composition. I have to have something there in the beginning that I can relate to, even though I don't know quite where it's leading. But as I said, it's a journey of discovery. So at the moment, I have two animals, vague in shape, with various lines where I'm trying to figure out the outline. This is always how I begin. I have to have something on the canvas that will fire my imagination. It's a process of adding and eliminating, a bit like a potter or a sculptor. I'm trying now to fill in a further animal in the centre, but he looks rather too low at the moment. He's not really quite what I want, so I'm probably going to have to add something else to elevate him. And here it is. The original monkey or chimp is still below, but now I'm beginning to think about Charles Darwin and preserving the species. This central figure will now be the axis for the rest of the composition, which I will gradually, I think, fit around him. Although I'm not sure what he's suspended on yet, I'm going to need to build some sort of structure to support him and to be a backdrop to the two, I think, lions in the foreground. This is always a problem, but they always resolve themselves. I think it's rather good having mistakes within any composition because they often lead you to new ideas. So I'm now seating him on some sort of plinth and gradually filling in colour this time, the outline of a horse perhaps and the beginning of a large elephant. And as you can see, the chimpanzee is central to this composition. Sometimes I don't use colour for a long time, other times I introduce it more quickly into the composition. I'm probably being more decisive than in a lot of paintings. Sometimes I flounder around for possibly weeks trying to devise a composition that I will find inspirational and one that will charge my imagination so that I want to take it further and further. And as you can see, I'm now filling in the colour of the elephant himself and gradually making a more accurate centre to the composition. I've also given supports to the plinth that the chimpanzee is sitting on, and I have a feeling now it's some sort of box or case that will be containing other animals, although I'm not sure what, but something will inspire me along the line. It's always a challenge, but I guess it's a challenge that I like. So I have to trust in the creative spirit. Sometimes, as I've said, I flounder around for a very long time. Other times, a composition seems to pour out almost as quickly as I can paint. This so far has been created in a period of 3 or 4 days. You can see the addition of the brown bear, who is leaning his front leg on the side of the crate. I've also added the rhinoceros. It feels a bit clock-like, a bit as if it's conveying time, which really suits what I'm trying to convey. As I said, I've been thinking about Charles Darwin and the evolution of the species. So I like the idea that the chimp, who is probably fairly closely related to us, being central to the composition. And I've also got a little figure beginning to emerge in the right-hand corner. Whether it's going to be a person, now you can see that I've actually trying out 2 giraffes. I saw 2 giraffes quite recently at the Cotswold Wildlife Park, and what fascinated me was that even though they're exceedingly tall with long legs and very long necks, that in their house they were in very close proximity, and the heads often crossed over one another, almost as if they were communicating in some way. So I'm trying it here in the composition. Whether it will stay, I'm not sure. I've also put an ostrich on the other left-hand side. Sometimes I'm looking for something that will fit in compositionally. I often feel that actually painting a figurative painting isn't that different from painting an abstract painting, because you're trying to manipulate all the elements, even though they're figurative, to make a composition. So at times I look at it almost like an abstract composition, although all the components are figurative. Fairly central to this, you will now see that the crate contains 3 Gloucestershire old spots. I like often to use things that are familiar or make reference to the area in which I come from. And you probably noticed that I've started to paint out the giraffes, as I didn't feel they felt comfortable in that corner, but I've added at a lower height the neck and head of a camel. I loved seeing camels when we were in Saudi Arabia, so ever since then, when I was sent to do a large commission of 15 big paintings, canvases, after I'd studied the people and the culture of that region. So camels have remained in my psyche. I've also added the head, probably of a tiger, just below that section, and started tentatively to put stripes on the white horse and a black nose, so perhaps he's turning into a zebra. And here in the foreground, I've added a lamb. I love the biblical reference that this makes to the lion and the lamb lying down together, and feel that it is a very good symbol to us all. I've also now added spots to the second animal in the front foreground, turning him into a leopard. I'm a bit concerned about how I'm going to hold all these animals in, so I painted the two side struts of the frame to try and construct a vehicle or a convincing way for the composition to hold these animals in. And because I love to tell stories within the paintings, I want it to make a plausible or convincing composition. And I'm beginning to get an idea of what I'm going to do. So as you will see, I've now added a bar across the top that is divided into several sections through which we see sky, as I've also painted in sky and rather more animals. As you can see, on the left-hand corner, top corner, I have moved the giraffe so that the giraffe is peering in, and below the giraffe I have a black horse and a figure with red hair blowing in the wind. And across the top section I've constructed something that looks like the beam supporting a roof with birds perched across it, taking us over to the elephant, where I now have a young chimpanzee hanging from that bar, and a little further to the right I have a fruit bat from Mauritius, and I've started to add birds in the sky, and in that, or on the right hand side, another figure with red hair blowing in the wind. I now have a feeling that it might be a little like the ark, so that they're contained there. So, as I say, the story evolves as I create the composition, and you'll see a parrot on the chimpanzee's shoulder, and then lower down on the left hand side I've added a rabbit and a chicken behind the legs of the ostrich, and coming on from either side you can only just see the noses of a tiger on the right hand side, and I think it will be a leopard on the left hand side. The tiger within the composition on the right hand side, just behind the rhinoceros, has begun to evolve. He's now got his stripes, etc., and there are little birds on the back of the elephant and on his head, and clouds in the sky indicating that it might have been raining quite a lot. I've also started to add insects, moths, to the two side frame constructions, so that I can include insects as well in this painting that I think I'm going to call Preserving the Species. Again, making reference to Mr. Darwin, but perhaps also the plight of our planet, where many of our animals have become extinct, and just a little voice saying we must preserve them. You can see now, because I'm feeling I must say this, that I've actually painted a little depiction of myself at some stage in my life, painting as if I'm behind or between the two chimps, and I'm painting the younger one that is hanging from the beam. So gradually it evolves, and I'm beginning to get a feel for what the painting is actually about and saying. A lot of it is subconscious when I'm painting, and I only have my own intuition or psyche to tell me whether I'm going in the right direction. You'll notice that a lot of the animals have become more refined, such as the zebra's distinctive stripes. And now you will see that I've added other animals too, even overlapping in the foreground. The Australian black swan and the koala bear, and a wombat, inspired particularly by the fact that two of my dear friends and collectors go each year to Australia to visit a wombat hospital. So I did feel I ought to make a reference in this painting to the wombat too. And just overlapping the wombat, I have a green snake and more insects. I've added a butterfly on the left hand side, and I've added a red and white snake on the right hand side with more moths and butterflies. I've also included a tortoise and a mole in the centre overlapping the white lamb, and a snail and a frog and a little shrew near the front. Also, I've placed a penguin on the crate next to the chimpanzee, and the chimpanzee's parrot has now flown onto my shoulder, and on the other shoulder of the chimpanzee is an owl, above whom two little birds seem to be hovering above the elephant. Also, on the left-hand side, you can now see a badger peering through. As I said, I like to incorporate some animals that are native to this country or area. And I did do a small series of badger paintings, particularly when they were being culled, to show my dismay that these beautiful creatures were being culled because it was thought that they might be spreading TB, and I would have thought perhaps it would have been better to vaccinate them. You can see the composition is becoming very dense, and on the right hand side, overlapping the tiger, is peering out from behind the pillar, is another little white lamb with its ear protruding further into the composition. And you can now see the stripes on the tiger's paw coming round the corner of the frame. And above the lion, and well, sort of overlapping the lion, and above the white lamb is a white dove of peace, which is also sometimes seen as a symbol for the Holy Spirit. So I like to think that all God's creatures are perhaps protected by Him in the wilds, but it's just probably our mismanagement of the planet that stops them being able to thrive as they would naturally. if you look right in the foreground, you can now see that I have an iguana and a lizard just sort of clambering into the foreground of the composition, bringing another colour, which is rather good. So I have the green of the lizard and the iguana, and more tiny insects on the pillars of the frame each side. And I don't know if you can see the animal walking onto the painting from the left hand side now has spots because he is the partner of the leopard. So it has really become quite a dense composition, and we decided to use it as the centrepiece of my exhibition in London last year at Pantron Hall, and I entitled the exhibition Preserving the Species. It was a very popular painting, and it has now gone to live in the home of a new collector who happened to see it in the window of the gallery. So things like the clouds, you might also notice, have changed. They're much redder now, whereas they were white fluffy clouds, but now they're a little bit angry, perhaps warning us that we should be doing more to protect our wonderful world, this beautiful planet. Preserving the Species was the first painting I did towards my London exhibition of last year. But it, in turn, inspired the whole theme of the exhibition. So towards the end of my painting for the show, the last work I did was, as you can see, a continuation really of the theme. You can see that I've vaguely painted it in to start with. It's going to be called Coming to the Table, and here I'm having humans sitting around in the traditional Last Supper fashion and sharing the meal with one another. But I'm here suggesting that we should be thinking of all the other inhabitants of the planet. So they are gradually beginning to creep in. In the centre of the composition, because my son Nathan had just sent me a wonderful bouquet of flowers, including sunflowers, I decided they should actually be the centrepiece of the painting. One of my friends, the art critic and writer Martin Bailey, immediately said, "Are these making reference to Van Gogh?" Particularly as he is the Van Gogh expert and has written many books on him. So they are also making reference, as often I do within paintings. If I use a bowler hat, I'm usually thinking about Magritte, and this is just a nice way of linking the past to the present. You can see the composition gradually building up, and I'm trying ideas in the foreground where I've drawn with a brush bowls and bottles, seeing how the composition would overlap. My work is all about overlapping and making a very dense composition within it. You can see more animals creeping in from the sides and at the top, and the occasional bird. As I paint, gradually, a bit like being a method actor, the characters around the table begin to evolve. It's as if I feel I am each one when I'm painting them, and the painting suggests as much to me as I do to it. Here you can see me in the studio, which gives an idea of the scale of the painting and of the way that I mix my paint in many jam jars, coffee pots, etc., so that I have enough to apply quite liberally when I want to, so I don't keep running out if I was mixing on a palette. You can see the introduction of colour now becoming quite strong within it, and the bowls that were just lines in the front are now beginning to evolve into bowls of fruit. And the chairs that I've drawn in will gradually become canvas back chairs. On the table, the loaves of bread and the cheeses and the big apple tart and the raspberry tart and the bowl of fruit, everything is beginning to take on more of a reality. It's as if I'm trying to breathe life into this composition. And as I say, it's a journey for me and it's a journey for them. So they gradually turn into people within a setting, and I'm trying to breathe life into them, just as I am with the animals who are coming along to the table from the sides. And I like the idea of the term coming to the table, and it was one that I heard used by Rowan Williams when he came to give a talk to the Bishop's Breakfast Club or group, and he said that we must remember all those who are not at the table. So it's stuck in my mind, and I do return to the theme of a supper or the dinner, referring or making reference to the Last Supper time and time again, as it is, I think, a timeless subject. You can see now I've added monkeys to the front, and I'm using a similar device here. I've painted the two side edges of the frame to look like rather fat bamboos, and I'm using them as a structure at which to be able to place both insects and, as you'll see later on, plant life when I have ivy creeping up and entwining itself around them. I'm also adding small birds in the sort of rather jungular or tropical background, and again the wise owl sitting on the shoulder of the woman to the right of the central protagonist. The animals are becoming clearer just as the people evolve, and the density of detail becomes greater and greater. So every brushstroke isn't a single brushstroke, it's the culmination of very many layers of paint, one laid over the other, until I manage to achieve the shape or form within the composition that I want. So as I said on the previous painting, I see it also like an abstract composition, but I'm also trying to breathe into it plausibility and the story, so that it will somehow convince the viewer and encourage them to enter into the painting. I've now added birds to the heads, and you can see the ivy has entwined itself up either of the side struts of the frame. And the monkeys are actually joining into the feast, and again butterflies within the composition and on the outer struts, and coloured birds and the moon are still growing at the top. And if you look very carefully at the top right hand corner, you will see evolving between the fronds of the palm trees the outline of 2 or 3 little figures who are looking as if they might actually live in that part of the world, but have not been invited to the table, but are looking with great interest, perhaps thinking, I'd like to be there too, and so they should. So this was the final work for the exhibition, and when it went into the catalogue, when the proofs came back from the printers, I wasn't satisfied, so I then did more work on it through the night and sent it again to the photographers, who made a new large transparency with greater detail in. I'm afraid this is something I often do, and so the printers have to be very patient with me, as does the gallery, because it's very important that the painting is as right as I can get it to be when it's actually hung on the wall or presented in the catalogue. So now you've seen both the start and the finish of the paintings for Preserving the Species, my exhibition, that took place in September of last year at Pantron Halls in London's Pall Mall.